Hello, my name is Biggin, at least that's what I go by. I'm going to tell you some stories, or at least that's my idea. Maybe a little background behind it. As you might have noticed, I'm a little mobility challenged. Old age has slipped up on me real quick. So my wife has said, my wife will be 60 years very soon, has always said that I'm a professional storyteller and a BS artist. She tagged me with that at a area tractor show where we were demonstrating Fairbanks Morse engines, and she put that on one of my engines, and the Amish loved it. So, but it's always gone back to my telling stories. In 2015, we were gone for 26 days out west. We covered every state, but well, covered all states but 4 west of the Mississippi, and we did it all on our Goldwing motorcycle, pulling the motorcycle camper behind it. And but my wife always wanted to see all the overlooks. When we were in the mountains, she wanted to see all the overlooks. So being mobility challenged, I stayed with the motorcycle. She went to the overlooks. And when she came back, she said she'd always find several people standing around listening to my stories. So that's why she tagged me a professional storyteller. I think the first story I'm going to start out talking about is one of the old timers that I vaguely remembered as a very young boy. That was Uncle Billy. Uncle Billy was a town blacksmith. Uncle Billy was a character. He really was. He built a motorized wagon before anybody else, or at least before Henry Ford built a motorized vehicle. Uncle Billy had his blacksmith shop in town, and he convinced one of his brothers to start a lumber yard at the same place, and so he had a blacksmith shop, and lumber yard was there, and the stories about Uncle Billy could be endless. Uncle Billy supposedly built an airplane. Nobody saw it. He had it in a locked building back in the back behind the lumber yard, and nobody was allowed in there. But nobody ever saw it fly, or nobody ever saw any remains of it. So anyway, Uncle Billy, he worked as a blacksmith until he was 90 years old. And when he was 90, he quit blacksmithing and made brooms until he was 95. So was quite a gentleman. So he was my, I guess he would have been the uncle of my mother's older sister's husband. And I can remember my uncle had got a war surplus, World War II surplus motorcycle. You could buy them, I think, for $75 or something like that. And he had one, and we were down at my grandma and grandpa's having a big family get-together. Uncle Billy came up down there. He went up to my uncle and says, "I want to ride that motorcycle," or motorcycle is what he called it, I do believe. And my uncle tried to talk him out of it. Well, Uncle Billy wasn't going to be convinced otherwise, so they let him. Uncle Billy got on that motorcycle and off he went. Well, half hour 45 minutes later, here come Uncle Billy back, all scraped up, scratched up, and like that. He come up and said, "I'll never ever ride one of those again." Evidently, that old motorcycle had got him down in the gravel. Any motorcycle rider that is worth their weight has had a motorcycle get them down in the gravel or on the road some way or shape or form. So, oh well. Anyway, was quite the gentleman. What I remember most, about the only really memory I have of him was going to the post office. We used to walk up the railroad street and go to the post office, and that was where Billy and all of these fellow old-timers would hang out and tell the same stories over and over. I wish I knew the stories they were telling, but anyway, somebody told me that Uncle Billy always said when one of the girls would walk by and shorts were just becoming the thing. Oh my goodness, this would have been in the late 40s, and shorts were just coming. And they said Uncle Billy would go whew, when one of those girls would walk by, and so every time. So somebody asked him one day, he says, "Billy, why do you go whew, when one of those girls walk by?" Uncle Billy supposedly told him, "When I can't go whew," he says, "that's the day I want to die." Well, I don't know whether that was the day he died or not, but Uncle Billy had 4 sons. He put every one of them through medical school. They became doctors. It was quite the the achievement to put 4 sons through medical school. So anyway, that's my Uncle Billy story. So back to today. I don't know whether you notice my eyes go shut when I'm telling stories, and I don't mean that as a disrespect to the camera. I have a right eye that's not open very much anyway due to previous strokes, but my eyes go shut because I'm reliving those situations. I'm seeing I see Uncle Billy standing up there in front of the post office. Somebody asked me one time, what's the oldest you can remember, or youngest you can remember? And I said, well, after thinking about it, I said, I remember back to when I just turned 3 years old. And the reason I remember it because my mother was pregnant, and I can remember my mother wearing maternity clothes. Actually, I can remember back a little further than that because I remember my mother coming home one time in blackface with the big white lips and the black face and everything. Some group was putting on a minstrel show, as it was called back then. Of course, today you can't do that, but I remember her coming home from that and coming to get something, and she got out of the car, and oh my goodness, what a scary thing for a young boy. Probably wasn't quite 3 yet. In fact, I know I wasn't quite 3 yet. But anyway, I remember Mom wearing her maternity clothes and some of the dresses that she had. I remember my grandmother, my dad's mother, coming down to get me. She walked down about 6 blocks from her house to our house in Bridgeport, and she got me and little small bag of clothes that had been pre-prepared, and off we went. We walked up past Mr. Williams's house. He was a town banker. We walked the path up alongside his house and then up Church Street to my grandmother's house. And I stayed with my grandmother for 3 or 4 days. Quite an experience. Grandma was very strict. Grandma grew up at Bonnie, Epworth, Illinois, down on top of the big hill there at the Marshall Ferry, and up by the cemetery, back behind the cemetery up the top of the hill. Oh, well, anyway, I'll get back to the story on that one. But I remember getting corrected because I went into where my sister was at in the baby bed and tried to pick her up. And I remember that was very, very interesting. But back to where my grandmother grew up, and she was a quarter, and she was a Brumley. Her mother was a quarter, and they lived up there in a house that was built back in 1840s, 1850s, and but the old hill. My dad always talked about when they'd go down there to visit his Aunt Helen. That's what he always called her. She had one sister, and a younger sister, Helen. But when they'd go down there, they'd have to back up the hill with most of their cars, because most cars had gravity-fed fuel systems. So if you tried to drive up the hill, that put the carburetor higher up than the gas tank, so the gasoline wouldn't get in the carburetor, and then you have all sorts of trouble trying to back down the hill without having an accident, because brakes worked. Brakes would slow you down back in those days. So Dad said they always backed up the hill. That way the gas tank was always higher up than the carburetor. But Aunt Helen and Uncle Felix, Aunt Helen and Uncle Felix got married and sneaked off and got married. She was in her late 40s and he was in his early 50s. And when their daughter was born, he was 53 and her mama was 48 or 49. Quite the thing. So I grew up, let me back that up. Suzanne was born a year before I was, so this would have put Uncle Felix at 53 in 45, 44, 45, and Aunt Helen in there probably 48 at that time. But we used to go down there. That was Dad's favorite aunt, and other than driving over to see his grandma over in the area where Ross, the Oliver man, lives, North Vernon, Indiana. Ross lives southeast of there, 20 or 30 miles. But anyway, that was Dad's only relative that he really got to see, and he was always that was always his favorite relative. In fact, that's one of the only pictures we have from him when he came back from the Pacific, from Guadalcanal. He was there in a uniform in a casual uniform that was hanging on him like a set of curtains. So, but back to my storytelling. you know, days gone by, a life full of stories and a lot of different situations that were good and were bad. Probably 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So I think I'll end this story with Uncle Billy and my Aunt Helen and great Aunt Helen. And, well, I will add one thing. Great Grandma, born in Germany, from a German family that was strict. Her her husband, my great grandfather, was Frederick Herman, and my grandfather was Herman Frederick, and that's the way the family did back through history in my family, which a relative in Germany that I asked 25 years ago. I asked him, I found him on the internet and asked him if he could help us get any history of our ancestors in Germany, back in Germany. And it was about a year later my wife and I had moved, and we'd moved from St. Louis area to Evansville, Indiana area. And he found me on the internet down there and wanted to know if I was the one that had asked him about ancestors, and I immediately answered back, yes, I was. And he emailed back, quickly emailed back that you don't know how much trouble you caused me. That sentence, wow, made my tongue go down and my heart go up in my throat or whatever. But then he said he realized he didn't know his ancestors. His father was captured by the U.S. troops in northern Italy. His father was a member of the German army in World War II. He was brought back to Western Germany to the largest POW camp at Bad Aibling. Anyway, he went to work for the U.S. Army, being a cook, and he retired from the U.S. Army many years later as a cook at the Bad Aibling post, and I forget what they called it, base number 81 or something like that. They had a bunch of super secret listing stations and like that. In fact, my relative said that he got called upon by the police and the U.S. military police and as a teenager because he'd gotten a camera and he was taking pictures of the clouds in the sky, and he happened to be taking pictures with all the golf ball domes and everything in the foreground, and so his camera and all of his photographs he had taken disappeared, and so but anyhow, little bit of stories there. So I'll close out on this one. What story I start in with next is anybody's guess. I might be lucky to finish this video, or this one, but I promise there'll be another one. So, as they say, see you later. Be careful. Don't take any wooden nickels.